evening and welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
And I'm John Jessup. Tonight we bring you stories from around the world, beginning in the jungles of a place called the Darien Gap. It is considered one of the most dangerous places on earth. Still, immigrants from around the world wind up in Panama trying to push their way through the harsh conditions.
Their goal, make it to America. Instead, many end up in overwhelming local villages. Chuck Holton brings us tonight's top story from the Darien Gap.
There's a flash flood of human misery flowing down this swollen river deep in the Darien Gap, that lawless jungle region between Colombia and Panama. Rarely seen numbers of migrants from across the globe are taking their chances on the 6-day walk through the jungle, heading for the U.S. Many of them never make it out alive. Bajo Chiquito is the last outpost of civilization between Panama and Colombia. The lifestyle of the Embera Indians who make their lives here hasn't changed much in hundreds of years. They still rely on the river for everything from food to transport. With no running water or electricity, the one thing this village has is too many visitors. Migrants emerge from the jungle in small groups throughout the day, exhausted, sick, and injured, suffering everything from parasites to trench foot. It's a 3-hour ride upriver to the village in a dugout canoe. And on the way, you get a sense of the scope of the problem.
So we're still about 45 minutes away from Bajo Chiquito, and we're being passed by hundreds of migrants heading down to the next camp closer to the Pan American Highway. Looks like most of them are probably Haitian or Cuban.
By the time we got to the village, more migrants had already replaced the ones we passed on the river. More than 300 people per day are arriving at Bajo Chiquito, and the volunteer medics working in the village are completely overwhelmed. So is the city's rudimentary sewer. The entire village smells like human waste.
We have no electricity here. Look how we are living. The migrants keep coming, more every day. We are in a very difficult position.
Also on this trip, Wisconsin Congressman Tom Tiffany.
Well, the reason I went both to the Rio Grande and now down to Panama is I wanted to see it for myself, to see if it was as bad as what was being represented. When I went to the Rio Grande, it was clearly worse. And it's happening down here also in the Darien Gap. This is an incredibly arduous journey that people are going through the jungle in order to get here. And I mean, we see it right here. People's feet torn up, being carted around in a wheelbarrow. It is awful what is going on, and there's no reason for it.
The horror stories that I'm hearing from the people coming through here, as they step out of the jungle, they're just literally stepping out. They're finishing their walk right this minute as they come out of the jungle. And they're limping their way in, literally, in very bad shape. And they're all telling me there's so many people dying. There's so many people that are dying out here.
They have a population of almost 500 people. They've had over 1,000 migrants at a time that have been going through here. And it's completely disrupted this community. It can be stopped if the Biden administration would just say, okay, we're going to reverse what we did back on January 20th. We're going to secure the border once again, because that's what's unleashed this. And it's overwhelmed this community of Bajo Chiquito that we're in right now.
From Panama's Darien Gap, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Well, the chaos at the southern border continues to build as more and more illegal immigrants flood into the country every day. One European nation has taken strong action to protect their border, even in the face of intense global criticism.
Is there anything the United States can learn from its example? CBN's Jennifer Wishon traveled to Hungary to find out firsthand.
This is the border between Serbia and Hungary. This is the fence, often referred to as a wall, that draws so much criticism from Western Europe and much of the world. It went up 6 years ago as hundreds of thousands of migrants from Syria and other countries stormed through this Central European country on their way to Germany. A scene that's repeated itself. Today, a warning broadcast in 7 languages.
Approaching the border fence or touching it can cause injury and pain. I urge you to refrain from committing the crime.
Border police say it's still mainly young men trying to cross the border, often approaching the fence in military formations. Hundreds of migrants attempt to cross each day. Riot teams remain on standby, and now officials are bracing for another wave from Afghanistan.
Around 400 Afghans, including the family members, are now in Hungary, and we definitely will take care of them. But here there's a full stop. We will not receive anyone else. We will protect our border, we will withstand the pressure, and we will continue to stick to our own right to make our own decision whom we allow to enter the territory of our country and with whom we are ready to live together.
We're getting an aerial view of the border. Hungarian officials tell us in the summer of 2015, 150,000 refugees were walking across the border every month. They walked miles across a great expanse of quiet farmland, shocking residents.
A lot of problems there. There were a lot of damage in the agriculture. There were some farms, you know, and just went into the houses, which was very much irritating to the people living here.
General Bakandi George, Hungary's chief national security advisor, was waiting for us when we landed at the border. Could you have curbed this problem without a fence?
Egészen biztosan nem. Kerítés kellett ahhoz, hogy az előzönlést, a határátlépést akadályozzák. Ez nem megy másképp.
In a country with a history of oppressive occupations and a post-World War I treaty that dramatically reduced its size, Hungary is unapologetic about preserving its culture built on the foundation of Christianity.
És nyilvánvalóan a migráció nagyon...
Migration already brought forward huge cultural clash and will bring even more.
Under Soviet rule, Pastor Nemeth Sandor was forced to practice his faith underground. Today, he leads the largest evangelical church in the country.
Tragikus hibának tartanám.
I believe it's a tragic mistake.
Hogy Pál apostolnak az örökségét eltékozolná Európa.
Waste the heritage of the Apostle Paul.
Isten Pál apostolt Európába küldte.
God sent the Apostle Paul.
Ő rakta le Európában a kereszténységnek az alapját.
He laid the foundations of Christianity on this continent.
Senior Hungarian officials tell CBN News it's simple. They don't want a multicultural society.
We think that migration is harmful. It creates parallel societies. People losing their roots and their traditions. Also, promoting migration gives room to trafficking organizations and have also many security concerns.
Asbay and other officials say while they're not opposed to legal migration, the government seeks to help people where they are, rather than transporting them to a foreign culture. And in the face of criticism from the European Union and much of the world, Hungary sees securing its borders as key to its survival.
The Judeo-Christian revelation and values are something I am willing to fight for at the moment.
Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, reporting from Hungary's southern border.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Churches burned, pastors imprisoned, and genocide against ethnic Muslims. What's behind this major crackdown in China? Next.
Banning all the church activities, even those services or worship or prayer meetings in believers' own homes with their own family members.
July 22nd, 2020. A loud knock on the door at the home of a woman in China's Xiamen City. She tells the police outside they cannot enter her home without a permit. Moments later, they destroy the lock and enter anyway, breaking up what the government says is an illegal meeting. Fu says it's all part of President Xi Jinping's campaign of sinicization, which means Christians are only considered to be good citizens if they adhere to communist ideology.
Ironically, Xi Jinping's portrait was even put on the church pulpit along with the Chairman Mao. And the first line item of worship, by the government-sanctioned church before COVID-19 was to sing the Communist Party's national anthem.
And examples go beyond churches. In Fuzhou City, a Catholic family was forced out of their government-subsidized housing after they refused to remove religious icons from their home. And China's Religious Affairs Bureau has banned religious funeral ceremonies and preaching in funeral places. Meanwhile, Christians aren't the only ones suffering. Ethnic Uyghurs from East Turkestan, a region the communist government calls Xinjiang province, are under attack.
China is home to one of the worst human rights crises of our time. It is truly the stain of the century.
One day before he left his post as U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo officially announced that China is committing genocide against the Uyghurs and Turkic people. New Secretary of State Antony Blinken supports the genocide designation. For years, the Chinese government has forced Uyghur women to undergo abortions and forced sterilizations. Twitter recently locked the account of the Chinese embassy in Washington for tweeting that Uyghur women had been emancipated from being, quote, baby-making machines. The U.S. Defense Department says as many as 3 million Uyghurs are being forcibly detained in re-education and forced labor camps. The president of East Turkestan's government in exile told me on the Global Lane that China is using the camps as a place to brainwash the Uyghurs and harvest their organs for profit. And he says detainees are being used as slave labor.
Millions are still, working in slave labor factories, producing, products for companies like Apple, Nike, Costco, and dozens of others.
And Uyghurs are reportedly being used to manufacture solar panels for export to the U.S. and elsewhere. The Chinese government calls it a poverty reduction effort. The U.S. State Department is alerting corporate CEOs and others about China's use of Uyghur slave labor so they won't become involved. Meanwhile, despite the suffering, Bob Fu is expressing optimism about the country's spiritual future. He says when the Communist Party seized government control in 1947, only about 1 million people in China claimed to be Christian. But today, after 70 years of unrelenting persecution, their numbers have grown to as many as 130 million.
So I think at the end of the day, maybe we should call President Xi Jinping as God's, faithful servant to revive his church.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
Lebanon on the brink of disaster. What it means for the country and the rest of the Middle East when Faith Nation returns.
Welcome back. A country in crisis. Lebanon faces political and economic challenges that could bring about the Middle Eastern nation's collapse.
As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, the fall of Lebanon would have disastrous consequences for Israel.
Recently, these Lebanese demonstrators blocked the main road to Beirut's airport to protest the abysmal conditions inside their country.
All the people are hungry and no one has anything to eat. No one can do anything. There's no electricity at home, children need milk, and no one can afford to buy it. That's why we're here.
Lebanon's worst crisis in decades includes no functioning government, a national currency freefall, and growing national debt. The world witnessed the catalyst for this disaster last August when this explosion rocked Beirut, sending shockwaves throughout the country. Now, people must wait hours in line for fuel, and that's when it's available. Blackouts occur daily to save electricity, and many hospitals don't have enough medicine. Lebanon's caretaker prime minister is pleading for help from Middle East nations, the UN, and the international community.
To help save the Lebanese from death and prevent the demise of Lebanon. Lebanon is a few days away from social explosion. The Lebanese are facing this dark fate alone.
Lebanese expert Orna Mizrahi blames the situation on the combination of political turmoil, economic corruption, Hezbollah, and the COVID pandemic. She says the main problem, however, is a dysfunctional political class.
We have a very rich elite of all sects that it's combined. There is a combination of money and political control in Lebanon, and they are doing nothing to help their own people. They are deteriorating day by day till the situation that we have now.
Hezbollah, led by Hassan Nasrallah, is the strongest
crisis that has plagued the European Union since 2015. Lithuanian officials say Belarus is weaponizing migrants against them. This would be a great place to go camping if it wasn't for all the mosquitoes. I'm on the border between Lithuania on this side and Belarus. That's that post back there. In fact, there are a lot of people camping right back in those woods behind me, and they're preparing to cross illegally into the European Union. Many of them are unaccompanied minors, or at least they say they are. When we went and spoke with the head of the Migrant Center on the Lithuanian side today, she told us some of those unaccompanied minors are actually not.
I can see the people, and I can guess they are strongly built, and they don't seem to be minors. So they pretend to be 16 or 17, but I think they are maybe 25, 28.
Conflict has been brewing with Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko after allegations recent elections were rigged. Known as Europe's last dictator, Lukashenko has threatened to flood the EU with migrants and worse.
We thought ourselves immune, and until a few months ago, when Belarusian dictator decided that he would use migration flows as a means to punish Lithuania for its principled stance that we did not recognize the stolen election. And so his border guards suddenly started just repelling people. And then explicitly Lukashenko said that he was going to flood EU and the countries which oppose his regime with migrants, drugs, and recently said also radioactive materials.
And the migrants also admit the Belarusian government is behind the push.
1 month ago, the Lukashenko, there is open visa from Iraq person. I don't know, maybe they need more people come in Minsk, and I think they have problem with Lithuania. That's why they open visa for us.
This refugee center hosts migrants from all over the world, as far away as Venezuela. But most of the migrants come from the Middle East, especially Iraq and Kurdistan. However, almost none of them actually qualify for asylum.
So I don't know how long time I stay here. We are not animal. We are human, brother. We are human. It's no matter the Lukashenko, they have problem. He's okay, he's not okay. I don't care from Lukashenko. I don't care for the border. I care about me and about these people.
And the weaponization of migrants isn't helping. These Iraqis won't be allowed to continue into the EU because Lithuania knows each one that succeeds means many more will come. Meanwhile, the government is scrambling to stop others from crossing.
So we're trying to increase the physical presence of our officers at the border, as well as some physical barriers that we are imposing in the sectors where we think that the pressure likely to be highest. I and my